Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a Canadian mystery that I've known about for some time, but just recently got around to really digging into. First, I've been watching Doctor Who from way back before I went into the Army. Tom Baker was the best. I never really thought of myself as being a Whovian, but I did look at a lot of the things you could get, like a sonic screwdriver. It wasn't real, but it did look cool. The other day, I was going to replace the storage shed on the side of the driveway. It's where I keep things like oil and a few auto parts and nothing valuable, but the things that I don't want to have to walk all the way around to the tool shed to get. The thing is made out of plastic, and it's been there ever since we first moved in. The wind caught it one day and knocked it over and broke a few parts, and it's kind of a nasty, horrible-looking thing, but, well, it was usable. I got to thinking, why don't I build one instead of buy one? I could make it the way I wanted, and I wouldn't be forced to use what somebody else thought was a practical design. Well, as I was sitting there thinking about building or buying a new shed, I was inspired. Of course, it was while I was watching a Doctor Who episode. I thought, why not build a storage shed that looked like a TARDIS? This is when things usually go wrong. Well, I looked on the internet for a set of TARDIS plans. I looked at a lot of plans before I finally decided I thought I had the right set. I wanted the shed to be big enough to hold all of the RV gear that is currently in my tool shed. The things that I had to walk back and forth carrying out to the camper. I decided I was going to go 8 feet high by 5 feet wide. When I did the measurements, I realized it wouldn't fit under the eaves of the house. Well, I simply moved the location out to the front yard. I drew up my plans because the ones I had downloaded were just a bit off from what I wanted. I went and I bought all the material. Mostly 3/4-inch plywood. Do you know who invented plywood? It was the ancient Romans. Those great big shields you see the soldiers carrying, those were made out of plywood. It's very strong, yet very lightweight. Well, I needed several sheets of plywood. I also needed the right color. TARDIS blue is hard to find. They were able to whip up a batch at Home Depot. The build took a lot longer and a lot more work than I thought. By about the halfway point, I was ready to quit. I can't believe I used to work as a carpenter, 50 hours a week. Of course, I was 20 at the time. Quitting halfway is just not in me. I soldiered on, and after a little bloodletting and several splinters, I had a great big box in my yard. Then I painted it blue. A paint will cover a lot of mistakes. It took a while, and a whole lot more time than I was thinking, but eventually, there it was. Back when I was 24, I was a painter. I was the foreman, even though I didn't really know what I was doing. I had needed a job, and a guy I knew, we called him Red, because his hair was bright red, was looking for somebody to do all the things that the real painters didn't want to do. Grunt work. I did a lot of things that didn't involve holding a brush, but once in a while I actually got to put some paint on the walls. Red's nephew was the foreman. One night, Red got into a fight with his son and his nephew. The fight got intense and, well, everybody quit. Everyone, that is, except me, because I wasn't at the party. I came into work the next morning only to discover that I was it. I was the whole crew. I was now Uncas, the last of the Mohicans. A couple of days later, Red's family came back, tails lowered, asking for their jobs back. The pay was excellent and the work wasn't really all that hard. Red hired everybody back, but I now had seniority over everyone. Red told them they could come back, but I was now the foreman. Boy, was that a trip. My pay doubled, my workload actually went down, and I was real popular for a couple of weeks with the rest of the guys, seeing as I used to be the helper. Red decided to sell the company to his nephew, and I was kept on as the foreman because for some mysterious reason I was able to do the job despite a lack of experience. I worked there until a position at the fire department opened, and, well, I moved on. Any of y'all out there working a go-nowhere, do-nothing job, don't become a slacker. You never know who might be watching you, thinking that maybe you should be offered a better position. If you work as if what you're doing is the best thing going, someone someday just might give you that job that you want. You never know. Well, since I now have a big blue box sitting in my front lawn, I've had a lot of people stop by and look at it and say, "Hey, is that a time machine? Or is that from Doctor Who?" I've had a few people take photos, too. Yeah, I'm not quite done with it, but it does look like a TARDIS. Here lately, there have been a lot of werewolf sightings reported on the web. It would seem as if one story kind of creates the next one. At least, that's what the skeptics want you to think. Stories of werewolves have been around for thousands of years. People who can turn into a wild beast and go hunting other folks is a common story found in just about every country. France has one of the better recorded legends, the Beast of Javadon. As people moved from Europe to the Americas, they brought their legends and tales with them. With so many people coming from France to live in Canada, it isn't all that odd to find werewolf legends in the Great White North. The shape-shifting beast did not move there from Europe. The Indians already had stories of people who could turn into monsters. The French simply gave them a new name. The story of a human being assuming a wolf shape is certainly one of the most generally diffused throughout the world, and the werewolf story comes to us from ancient Roman times. French Canadians believed that if a person does not partake of the sacrament for 7 years, he will turn into a loup-garou, or man-wolf. The loup-garou might also assume the form of a wildcat, a hare, a fox, or even a black hen. But at night, he was obligated to run through the woods of deserted areas. He, or she, is endowed with supernatural speed and strength. A fierce creature with appetite that exaggerated any animal of its kind, he delighted in killing and devouring people, especially children. When he returned to human form, he may be recognized by his excessive leanness, his wild eyes, and haggard countenance. In order to regain his estate as in humanity, it is necessary that the blood of the monster should be passed on to someone else. One tourist attraction you might want to look into is the Screaming Tunnel. It is a small limestone tunnel running underneath what once was a Grand Trunk Railway line, now the Canadian National Railway. Located in the northwest corner of Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. The actual location of the attraction is just off Warner Road. Often thought to be a railway tunnel, it was actually constructed as a drainage tunnel so that water could be removed from the farmland. This water would go underneath the Grand Trunk Railway and down to the valley below. Farmers began using the tunnel to transport goods and animals also. The tunnel was constructed in early 1800. It is 16 feet high and 125 feet long. The legend says that the tunnel is haunted by the ghost of a young girl who had escaped a nearby burning farm. She ran to the tunnel with her clothing ablaze. She died in the center of the passageway. There are several variants of the legend. In one version, the girl was set on fire by her enraged father after he lost a custody battle, along with his children, in a nasty divorce. Another tells of a young girl being attacked inside the tunnel, and her body was burned to prevent any evidence from being found. All versions of these legends end with the girl's screams filling the tunnel as she was burned to death. Ugh. People who visit the tunnel late at night say they can still hear the young girl screaming from inside. If you walk to the middle of the tunnel and strike a match, the ghost of the young girl will show up and try to chase you out. Located amid the rugged, scenic vista of Conception Bay off Avalon Peninsula of Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, is a tiny speck of land called the Bell Island. It is 6 miles long and 2.5 miles wide. Yet it strikes an imposing presence with its soaring cliffs on all sides and its numerous sea caves and sandstone sea stacks. It is known for its craggy, menacing facade, for the most part seeming to be almost unapproachable, with its jagged, rocky exterior, as well as for its rich diversity of seabirds. Yet, for all of its wild charm and rugged scenic beauty, the island also has its share of secrets. Bell Island has long been considered to be exactly what it looks like, merely just an island sticking up out of the water. 1896, it was discovered there was a rich source of iron ore. Before long, the iron ore mines began popping up all over the island, with Bell Island supporting 6 mines. These mines were very ambitious, spreading out into a spiderweb of tunnels beneath the ground and even extending out under the sea. They attracted a hodgepodge of ethnicities from Irish, English, Scottish, German, and Estonian, all mingling together and coming to work in the mines. All these different cultures all mixing together. By 1950, Bell Island was considered to be one of the largest iron ore mining operations in the world. The towns, such as Wabana, were booming. This massive growth also attracted parasites and the dregs of society. The island became a haven for various criminals, misfits, and stowaways who fed off the underbelly of all of people's success. It was a rough place to live. They also have many weird tales of supernatural. One of the most common stories whispered among the locals involves the expansive wetlands and the bogs of an area called Butler's Marsh. Here, it is said, roamed malignant, vicious fairies that were not shy about attacking anyone who crossed their domain. It was not uncommon for people passing the area to carry a Bible with them and read it as they're passing the bog. It was to ward off the creatures. Some of them would carry bread with them, and they would scatter it along the ground at the edge of the bog, hoping that this would appease the fairies. You have to understand, the fairies from Europe were not the cute little things that Disney likes to draw. These things were nasty. They would kidnap people. They would lead people astray to their deaths. The Newfoundland playwright Robert Caffe once called them mean, twisted, sinister creatures. These fairies not only attacked islanders, but would lure them to their doom out in the marsh. These fairies also liked to abduct children, and they caused all manner of illness and misfortune. Pretty much anything that went wrong on the island was blamed on the fairies. There are other supernatural denizens to join the evil fairies of Bell Island. Considering the ambitious mining operations going on and the lack of any real safety precautions, many miners met their doom down in the dark, dank tunnels, and indeed many of the mines of Bell Island are said to be prowled by spectral phantom miners. Perhaps the most famous paranormal entity of the island is that of the Bell Island Hag. The story begins in the years of World War II. The waters off Bell Island were prowled by German U-boats. On occasion, the sailors aboard these submarines would sneak onto the island in order to resupply and ferret out sympathizers or gather intel. A young servant girl from Upper Island Cove happened across some of these German sailors on the island. The men grabbed her and drug her out into the marsh, where they did some nasty things before killing her. Locals said that they heard her cries for help, but they had assumed that this was just a trick being tried out by the fairies, and so nobody did anything to try to stop the assault. The suffering and horror the girl endured seemed to have led to her spirit becoming stuck in the marsh after her death. She became known as the Hag with two faces. The Bell Island Hag is said to appear at first as a beautiful woman dressed in white, who appears out of the shadows to entice those who see her. As she draws closer, the woman begins to transform. Her beautiful white dress turns gray and deteriorating into tatters as she falls down to all fours. There's a horrible smell that fills the air. The hag will then take on the countenance of a wretched, rotting corpse. The Bell Island Hag is such a popular legend that she was immortalized with a Canadian post-Halloween themed stamp, and she continues to live on in the local lore. Aside from ghosts and fairies, Bell Island has another unsolved mystery that occurred on April 2nd, 1978. People heard a loud explosion reverberate through the region that damaged homes and blew out windows. They discovered a huge crater. The event became known as the Bell Island Boom. It has been speculated as being everything from a massive lightning bolt to secret military tests. Some think that maybe aliens were involved, those from outer space. The loud boom and crater have never been solved. The mines closed in 1966, and since then the population of Bell Island has dropped dramatically, but it has enjoyed a modest amount of success as a tourist attraction. Visitors take the ferry out from nearby St. John's to enjoy both the natural splendor as well as the spooky stories and legends that the island has. It is very interesting just how much strange phenomenon this little speck of land has managed to attract to itself, and although it may all be just misunderstanding and spooky tales, it certainly is an intriguing story of a faraway place harboring deep secrets we may never comprehend. Last week I mentioned how Canada had a lot of mysteries. Besides the ones that I just mentioned, there are still hundreds up there. Well, after having talked about it last week, I decided to look into some of them myself. The population of Canada lives within a few hundred miles of the border, making huge uninhabited areas to the north. Some places in this world seem to be magnets for evil. Often these areas are found in the fringes of society, the empty spaces between cities and towns, places where people visit but they don't like to live, as if there might be something there that is creating an uncomfortable feeling. Maybe the land holds spirits that wish to be left alone. Maybe some of these spirits want company. This may lead to unexplained disappearances or murders with no clues as to who did them. One such place is a road that lies amongst the cold expanses of the rough, unforgiving wilderness sprawled across Canada. It is a place that is at once beautiful and deadly. Just a trail that connects one town to the next. So many people have gone missing or been found dead, it led to some of the locals putting up signs along the side of the road warning people to travel with caution. A 450-mile stretch of remote, heavily forested expanse of rugged land in British Columbia, Canada, spans a road that on maps is called Highway 16. It is a small piece of the Trans Canada Yellowhead Highway, also known as the Park-to-Park Highway. Here in the U.S., we have interstates and highways that crisscross our country. It makes getting from place to place a lot easier. In Canada, there is the Trans Canada Highway, or TCH. Like here, some parts of the highway system are nice, big, wide-open, multi-laned roadways, while other parts are two-lane passages running through dense forest. Highway 16 in British Columbia is a section of the Yellowhead Highway, a part of the Trans Canada Highway that runs across western Canada. The highway follows the path of the northern British Columbia alignment of the Canadian National Railway. The number 16 was first given to the highway in 1942. Originally, the route that the highway took was more to the north of today's route, and it was not as long as it is today. Highway 16 originally ran from New Hazelton east to the obscure location known as Eliza Lake. The country is wild and there are more animals than humans. Trees line both sides of the highway. There are vast stretches where no one lives. This makes a perfect location for unsavory activity. A lot of people living in this part of the country are members of the First Nations. Money is tight and jobs are few. Anyone wanting to go from place to place find themselves either having to walk or hitchhike. When I was young, hitchhiking was a common thing. I did it a few times when I had to do things like my truck broke down between Texarkana and Queen City. There's not much out there. I hitched a ride with an 18-wheeler into town, bought the parts I needed just as the sun was going down. I was heading back to my pickup and I held out my thumb. A DPS trooper stopped, picked me up, and took me back to my truck. Things like this weren't all that odd back then. I lay there under my truck all night working on the side of the road, and every once in a while I would see the DPS trooper. He'd pull up and stop and check to make sure I was okay. He never gave me any problems. Finally, as the sun was coming up the next morning, I got my truck back on the road and ran on down to where I lived. Things have changed from back then. Now, there have always been people that did bad things for as long as there have been people. A 6-foot-tall man hitchhiking through the wilderness is not a good victim. Predators like to look for the weaker folks to go after. There are parts of Highway 16 where you will see more bears than you will see cars. The road can take on a kind of sinister aspect, especially as the sun goes down. It's a place that can be beautiful and mysterious at the same time. The locals know this stretch of highway as the Highway of Tears. It is called that because there have been a series of disappearances and murders of women and girls that date back 4 decades. A large number of these have never been solved. It is perhaps not surprising that people would disappear in this place. The area is sparsely populated with only scattered logging settlements and villages along the 23 First Nations that the highway cuts through. There are vast stretches where there are no people at all, and the lack of public transportation and crippling poverty conspire to make hitchhiking the most common way to get around. With this remoteness and the inherent danger of hitchhiking, it seems a perfect storm for murder and vanishings. Yet what is shocking is just how many there have been in this one area, and how few of them have ever been solved. Hitchhiking used to be the way to get around. It was relatively safe and inexpensive. You held out your thumb and a car would stop and give you a ride down the road. I hitchhiked a lot when I was younger. 99% of the population are decent folk. Some may act up a bit on occasion, but most are honest and won't hurt you. It's that 1% you have to look out for. Since 1969, dozens of people, mostly indigenous girls and women, have either gone missing or turned up brutally murdered along the road and its adjacent side roads. There are 18 officially listed murders or missing persons between 1969 and 2006, but the actual number is likely much higher and rising all the time. Some say it's as many as 45 or more. Authorities have been largely baffled by these cases, which are often surrounded by weirdness, wilderness, and strange clues. My sister-in-law was a full-fledged Ho-Chunk Indian. She referred to herself and her fellow tribe as being Indians. My nephew John says Indian, feather, not dot. I will go with what real Indians say and not what some politically correct bureaucrat says. The trail of missing people and murdered attributed to the Highway of Tears officially began in 1969, when on October 25th, 26-year-old Gloria Moody was seen alive and well leaving a bar in Williams Lake, British Columbia. The next day, her body was found 6 miles away, stashed in the thick woods near a cattle ranch. The following year, July 1970, 18-year-old Micheline Parr was dropped off at the gates to the Tompkins Ranch by 2 women who had given her a ride. She proceeded to vanish off the face of the earth, never to be heard from again. She is still missing today. 1973 would see the mysterious murders of 2 young women, Gail Wise, 19, and Pamela Darlington, also 19, both of whom disappeared while hitchhiking, and their bodies were found dumped in muddy ditches along the side of the road. August 1974, 16-year-old Colleen Macmillan went missing as she was hitchhiking. She was going to see her friend. They found her body later in the wilderness. Later that year, December 1974, 14-year-old Monica Ignace vanished while walking near Taraka, British Columbia. It was 4 months later that her body was found a few miles away from where she had disappeared. The 70s streak of deaths would continue into 1978 with the disappearance of 12-year-old Monica Jack, who was last seen riding her bike along the Highway of Tears. At the time, Monica had just vanished off the face of the earth. An extensive search turned up nothing. It took 17 years before her skeletal remains were discovered at the bottom of a remote forest-choked ravine by forest workers. The shocking deaths and disappearances did not abate and continued right on into the 80s. 33-year-old Maureen Mossy was last seen hitchhiking near Salmon Arm, British Columbia, on May 8, 1981. They found her body later at what's called a runoff lane leading to Highway 97 and Kamloops by a woman who was out walking her dog. Now that would kind of make your walk not quite so enjoyable. May 1983, Shelley Ann Bosque, 16, vanished and was never seen again. 24-year-old Alberta Williams wandered off and disappeared after leaving a crowded bar with her sister and a group of friends in September 1989. Nobody can say why she simply vanished. She had been there one moment and gone the next. A few weeks later, her body was found near Prince Rupert, British Columbia, near some old railroad tracks by the Tai Overpass. The body showed evidence of strangulation and sexual assault. Also in 1989 was the mysterious disappearance of 15-year-old Cecilia Ann Nicole, who was last seen on Highway 16 near Smithers, British Columbia. One of the most chilling disappearances from the 80s involved not one lone hitchhiker, but an entire family. On the night of August 2nd, 1989, a man named Ronald Jack was drinking at a bar in Prince George, British Columbia, when he met a man who offered him 2 weeks' work at a logging camp. Since he'd been looking for a job, Ronald gladly accepted. He made preparations for himself, his wife Doreen, and their 2 children, 9-year-old Russell and 4-year-old Ryan, to make the trip to his new place of temporary employment. At 1:30 that afternoon, Ronald called his mother from the rest area along Highway 16 to inform her of his plans. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Ronald Jack and his entire family simply disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't know if there's a connection between Ronald Jack and Monica Jack. The same last name, but perhaps different families. Delphine Nicole, 16-year-old cousin of Cecilia Ann Nicole, who vanished in 1989, was last seen on Highway 16 near Smithers, British Columbia, and hasn't been seen since. Delphine was hitchhiking on June 13, 1990, between Smithers and her home in Telqua. Like her cousin, Delphine was also never seen again. The 90s certainly saw plenty of sinister activity along the Highway of Tears, and in 1994, Ramona Wilson, 16, vanished without a trace as she was hiking on July 11th of that year, on her way to a graduation party. A 7-month intensive search turned up nothing, and then Ramona's mother received an anonymous call claiming that her daughter's body could be found in a field near the airport. A search of the area turned up nothing. It was not until 10 months later, April 1995, that her remains would finally be found by 2 moose hunters. Her body was found laying under some trees in the woods well off the side of the road. Another case from 1994 was the disappearance of 16-year-old prostitute named Roxanne Tiara, who, in July of that year, told her friends she was going to meet a customer she was never heard from again. Roxanne's corpse was found by chance in some dense underbrush near Burns Lake August 17, 1994. Let's face it, some folks make bad decisions in their life. Some guy needs to feed his family and he steals something only to get caught and wind up in jail. A woman or a young girl wants all the things that other people with more money have, so she turns to prostitution as a way of making money. Not everybody that breaks the law is a criminal. We don't know what we just might do ourselves if we find ourselves in the desperate straits with no idea on how to get out. Never judge a man until you walk a mile in his shoes. That way, if you decide you don't like him, you're a mile away and you have his shoes. Seriously, though, nobody knows really how they'll act until the fertilizer hits the ventilation system and bad things in your life are happening and you just can't find a way out. People do some things that later they wish they hadn't, and unfortunately in our society, some of these things will stick around the rest of your life. Think long and hard before you decide to do something illegal. It may affect the rest of your life and the lives of your friends and families. December 1994, Alicia Germain, 15, was found stabbed to death behind the Haldy Road Elementary School off of Highway 16. Highway 16 West, which is outside of Prince George. The following October 1995, 19-year-old Lana Derrick would vanish without a trace as she was heading along Highway 16 from Northwest Community College in Euston, British Columbia, to visit her home in Hazelton area. Lana was last seen on October 7, 1995 at a gas station near Terrence and has never been seen again. And with that, I'm going to take a very brief pause to play some commercials and take a few sips of coffee. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Did you stay up all night watching horror movies and now you think your house might be haunted? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and have them come by and check out your house. Maybe you accidentally invited a ghost or a spirit, or maybe it's just the plumbing. You can contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. I had no idea what I was missing until I had my eyes checked at the Optica del Norte, 107 Calle del Norte. Now I can see all kinds of things I'd been missing my entire life. You should get your eyes checked too. Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Isn't it about time you did something for your skin besides mistreat it? Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019 and take care of your skin with a free skincare class. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. The list of missing and murdered people on the Highway of Tears has grown well into the new millennium. June 21st, 2002, 25-year-old Nicole Hoare disappeared while hitchhiking from Prince George to Smithers on Highway 16 West. She has never been found. She doesn't really seem to fit the pattern of the other disappearances or murders because she was not a member of any of the local tribes. Now, she did have dark hair, and maybe the killer thought she was a local, or perhaps he just wanted to try something new. The thing about serial killers is they tend to go after the same basic people all the time. Some serial killers like women with long blonde hair, and some like them with dark skin. It's whatever their personal preferences happen to be. In 2005, Tamara Chipman, 22, vanished along the Highway of Tears in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. February 2006, the body of 14-year-old Aliyah Sarak Agur was found in a ditch by a passing motorist shortly after she disappeared. 20-year-old Madison Scott went to a big party at a campsite in Ogsback Lake in May of 2011. Once the partiers were finished and packed up to leave, Madison decided to spend the night camping. Madison was last seen in the early hours of May 28, 2011. After that, no one has any idea of what became of her. She failed to return home, and all attempts to contact her cell phone met with failure. A subsequent search for the missing girl found her pickup truck parked right where she had left it. Her purse and backpack were still in the truck, but her cell phone was gone. Madison's tent was still set up, and it was undisturbed. An extensive ground and air search was launched to try to find her, but no trace has ever turned up. The RCMP interviewed every person who had been at the party, but they could find no one who disliked her, held some sort of a grudge, or would have had any reason to harm her. Some amount of suspicion was aroused when it was learned that everyone else who had been at the party had ended up going home rather than camping out with Madison, except for one person, her friend Jordy Bollock, who, as far as anyone knows, was the last person to have seen the missing woman. Baldock said she had stayed behind after the party, but soon she decided that camping was not the thing to do, so she eventually packed her things and headed home. Baldock said Madison had been dead set on camping, even if it meant she would do so all alone. Police questioned Baldock, but turned up no evidence that she had anything to do with the disappearance, and she was released. Try this. Think about a party or a gathering you were at last month. Who all was there? What did they do? Now think to yourself, the answers you tell are going to either get you convicted of someone's murder or set you free. How well do you remember what happened and who did what? What did you do or say to someone there that could just possibly be taken in the wrong manner? Could someone else have heard you say something that could be considered suspicious? Another person of interest in Madison Scott case was a man named Frabone Jordson. Oh, what a name. Fribjon. They just love that J letter. A 20-year-old logger who had been friends with her and had apparently told some people that he knew what happened to her. A look into Jornson's past found that he was a drug user and had run-ins with the law in the past. Authorities began to think maybe Madison had been abducted because something Jornson said or did. He may have owed some drug dealers money and claimed Madison was with him. He was considered a suspect and questioned, but he was cleared in the disappearance after passing a lie detector test. To add to the mystery, Bjornsson vanished 2 days later, and his severed head was found in an abandoned house 2 weeks after that. The rest of his body has never been found. Although a spooky story, authorities came to the conclusion that Bjornsson's brutal murder was unrelated to the disappearance of Madison Scott. Other suspects were questioned in connection with the strange double case. Madison Scott's disappearance remains unsolved, and she has not turned up anywhere. No one was ever arrested for Bjornsson's murder. Being a poor community, the authorities tend to put few resources into solving these disappearances. When a body is found, the police will show up and try to find the killer. If the victim was last seen leaving a bar, the first assumption will be she was probably drunk and went with some other bar patron and wound up getting killed. What is known as a misadventure. Hanging out with the wrong people and taking risks, which is common with people who drink a lot. If the victim disappeared, then the first assumption is they simply moved away and didn't bother to tell anyone, even family or friends. This happens a lot more than most people would think. The person involved wanted to get away from everything in their life, so they suddenly just walked away from everything and everyone. Perhaps they planned to come back someday or to contact friends and family, but they just never do. The area is full of animals, some that just might see a lone hitchhiker as an easy meal. A hitchhiker may have been drug into the woods and the remains are there waiting to be found. The bottom line is usually the biggest roadblock to many of these missing persons cases. Putting a bunch of law enforcement personnel on a case is going to cost money. Just a couple officers on a case for a week can run into thousands of dollars. You have to pay them as well as equip them. Any evidence sent to the lab is going to run up a bill as well. All those fancy crime-solving techniques you see on CSI are very expensive. Then you have to pay the CSI investigators and the lab techs. The people doing the field work have to be put up in hotels or motels somewhere close to the scene of the crime. You have to pay for gas and food as well. The officers working the case are away from any other investigations. Personnel can only work so much at one time. The people doing the field work are probably going to do their absolute best. This is usually why they got into law enforcement to begin with. Oh yeah, there are some officers out there that aren't all that motivated, some that have spent way too much time working and not received any recognition. They've seen too many of their good co-workers get punished for things they did, and the slackers that seem to climb the ladder of success. That's just life. We had a saying back when I was in the Border Patrol. The guy looked good on paper. In other words, his file was fantastic. It said he was a lightning bolt waiting to be unleashed on the criminals. When in reality, the guy was a slacker, never did anything worth doing, but he had a really good sounding file. And unfortunately, there were a lot of those. The major stopping point is usually the folks with a checkbook. A woman, none of them know, vanished after hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere. The last time this happened, there was no conclusion to the case. The odds are this one will be the same. How much money is allotted to solving a case, combined with all the other cases that need looking into, can shut down an investigation in a few days. A crime committed in a poor neighborhood where tax dollars go but don't come back will receive far less attention than a crime that takes place in an affluent neighborhood that pays thousands of dollars into the management of the country. This leads to a slippery slope. Less law enforcement in poor neighborhoods leads to more crime being committed and going unsolved. The more crimes that go unsolved, the worse the neighborhood becomes, leading to more crime. A task force was formed to try to get to the bottom of all these murders and disappearances. Project Ipana was set up in 2005. Ipana is the Inuit word describing the spirit goddess that looks after souls just before they go to heaven or they're reincarnated. It was the investigators in the field who chose the name. The task force was created as a result of E-Division criminal operations ordering the review and investigation of a series of unsolved murders within Highway 16 area. The purpose of the investigation was to determine if a serial killer or killers were responsible for murdering young women traveling along the highway of British Columbia. E-Division is the division of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the province of British Columbia, Canada's westernmost province. It is the largest police body in the province, providing federal and provincial services throughout the province. They're policing all but 12 of the municipalities. The task force collected hundreds of reports, tips, and leads, as well as interviewing about 60,000 people, 1,400 of whom were considered to be actual persons of interest linked to the disappearances and crimes. Despite all of this, most investigations led nowhere, and success stories on the Highway of Tears are few and far between, with a vast majority of these cases remaining completely unsolved. One of the problems in getting to the bottom of these cold cases is the difficult terrain of the area. This is a vast expanse of remote, rugged country, far from prying eyes, and where cell phone reception is often spotty, if at all. There's no one to help a victim of foul play out there, and plenty of places to stash a body, where they will never be found. This is a wild land of sprawling forests, which one task force member, Sergeant Wayne Clary, has called a perfect hunting ground, a fact which is only compounded by the number of out-of-province truckers and travelers passing through, which all makes it very difficult to investigate these crimes. A lot of crimes are solved not by detectives working on some task force and running down hundreds of leads. A lot of cases are solved by chance encounters. 15-year-old Lorraine Leslie disappeared in 2010. The case was handed over to the Ipana. November 27, 2010, an RCMP constable made a routine traffic stop. The driver of a black pickup was acting suspiciously. Thinking that the driver was out poaching, the constable backtracked the vehicle through the snow to a ditch. He was looking for dead deer or moose, but the constable found the dead girl instead. 20-year-old Cody Logbakoff was arrested and taken in for questioning. Cody Logbakoff, a local man who was up until that point considered to be an upstanding model citizen, was charged for the murder of Leslie. Further questioning led him to being charged with 3 other murders that all took place along Highway 16. If you've never seen a police questioning take place, it isn't very exciting. They ask the same questions several times over, sometimes over several days. The same questions over and over. Everything gets written down, and the conversation is usually recorded. The best results are when the suspect is questioned in a very friendly manner. The investigator wants the suspect to trust them. As each question is answered, it is compared to how it was answered the last time. Most people can't keep a lie going very long without tripping themselves up. That thing about serial killers wanting to get caught is not true. It was a plot device in a fictional story. Serial killers like what they do. They like the power of life and death. It gives them a rush to decide who will live and who will die. Legbikoff was found guilty of 4 murders and sentenced to life in prison. He is known as the youngest serial killer in Canada. While the arrest and conviction of Legbikoff was a significant achievement and went some way towards solving some of the cases, and it did provide peace of mind for some of the locals, he could not have been responsible for all of the disappearances and murders, especially considering his young age and that these crimes had been going on since 1969. He could not have been responsible for the disappearance of Madison Scott since he was in police custody at the time. This means there were likely other killers out prowling this same road. Another significant development was made in 2012 in connection with one of the earlier murders that had occurred. A 16-year-old Colleen Macmillan was found murdered in 1974. When tests were run on the girl's clothing using advanced DNA analysis, they found a match of male DNA on her clothing, a man named Bobby Jack Fowler. Fowler was a drifter who proved to have a long criminal history of sexual assault, violence, and firearms possession. He was strongly suspected to be behind the murder, and he was believed to have been responsible for the deaths of Gail Weiss and Pamela Darlington as well, both also along the Highway of Tears. As the investigation went forward, the authorities began to suspect Fowler was also responsible for 6 other murders along the highway. Fowler was never convicted of any of these murders because he died in prison in 2006, long before the DNA tests placed him at the scene of the crime. His conviction had been for kidnapping and assault. As investigators dug deeper into the cases of murder, they stumbled upon Fowler as a suspect. Knowing who may have been responsible for 9 of the murders didn't answer all of the other crimes and disappearances along the Highway of Tears. Another arrest in connection with the crimes along the sinister highway was that of Gary Hanlon, who was charged for the 1978 killing of 12-year-old Monica Jack. Nearly 40 years later, Hanlon thought he was applying for a position with a major crime syndicate. He was asked about his past criminal activity, and he bragged about kidnapping Monica Jack. He told all the details of what he did and where he dumped her body. During his trial, the defense tried to have the recorded confession thrown out because they said it was obtained under improper questioning. The guy didn't know he was talking to the police. Well, the judge didn't allow the objection, and Hanlon was convicted of kidnapping and first-degree murder. He was given life in prison with a possibility of parole in 2034, if he lives that long. In prison, there's a pecking order. A murderer is at the top of the bunch. That is, as long as the victim isn't a child. Those who prey on children are considered to be the bottom of the batch, and they tend to die under unusual circumstances. Even convicts have a code of conduct. The RCMP has a criteria for crimes to be placed on the task force's caseload. This is just so each and every person who goes missing for a time or gets killed doesn't wind up stacked on someone's desk waiting to be looked into. There are a lot of cases that will just about solve themselves. Most murders are committed by somebody known to the victim. That's just how it is. The number of cases attributed to being in need of special investigation is not necessarily the number of murders that have taken place along Highway 16. First, somebody has to be abducted or murdered. The authorities have to be notified that somebody is missing. The number of missing might not be the number of files at the task force. A body has to be found to make it a murder case. No body, no murder. I know of a couple of guys that confessed to murdering a woman they knew. The three had gone bar hopping, and they wound up in a hotel room. After a bit, the woman decided she didn't much like the attentions of these two drunk guys. One thing led to another, and the woman wound up dead. The two guys took the body and disposed of it, and then they sobered up. They both felt horrible about what they had done, and they wound up going to the police and confessing. During the following investigation, the body couldn't be found. They confessed to the murder, but they couldn't find the spot where they had dumped her. This had taken place in Baycliff, right off of Galveston Bay. If you've ever been there, there are all kinds of out-of-the-way locations that you can get to one time and then later you can't find. The men were finally convicted of assault, and that was it. No body, no murder. Having a serial killer working an area isn't all that unusual. Having many in one small area is very odd. In order for all the killings and the disappearances to be semi-explained, there would have to be several serial killers all working the area over many years. One possible explanation is that I stumbled upon involves not evil humans but evil spirits that possess humans to take others' lives. Could some unknown, unexplained entity lurk along the edges of Highway 16, waiting for some unsuspecting man to come along and then enter him and go looking for young women to attack? Try explaining so many deaths in one area any other way. If a house or a ship can be haunted, why not a section of forest? Could all these murders and disappearances be just nasty, horrible people that like killing others? Or could there be some supernatural connection? We may never know, or we might find out tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends know what they're missing. If you have an idea for a show that you'd like to hear, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. I'm also working on my next book called Paranormal. If you have a true story, something that happened to you or a friend or a family member, something that hasn't already been told 100 times, you can contact me with the story. Just give me the basic details. I'll hammer it into some kind of a readable format, and then I'll send it back to you so you can read the draft and say, yeah, that's what happened, or no, that's not quite what I said. Once we get the thing figured out, I will print it up in my next book, and hopefully it'll be out before the end of the year. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.